Welcome to the enigmatic D5 course for Black. I am Latvian Grandmaster Arturs Neiksans, and it is my pleasure to present to you yet another course by Ray Enigma from Black's perspective. So after D4, D5, this is going to be our approach, very center-based, and if possible, we would like to switch some of the Janowski variation approaches. But of course, first, White has to make a choice how to continue. And in this course, we are going to have 13 chapters looking at some of the most popular continuations. So after D4, D5, C4, this is a super popular continuation, the so-called Queen's Gambit. So it's not only the Netflix TV series, it's also one of the most popular gambits in the from the White's perspective. So White plays D4, C4, and is willing to fight for the center. And I mean, Black has a number of choices how you can continue. You can take on C4, which is the Queen's Gambit accepted. You can decide to play C6, which is the Slav. Or in our occasion, we are going to play E6. Well, and from my Grandmaster's perspective, I can definitely say that E6 is often regarded as the best response for Black because we are avoiding symmetrical pawn structures. So if White will take on D5, obviously we will recapture with the E pawn and have a slightly unbalanced pawn structure and chances to take over the game, which by the way is one of the downsides of the Slav defense with C6. Now here White has a number of choices. So we are going to have a look at three main continuations, which is either Knight C3, Knight F3, or C takes on D5. Probably C takes on D5 is a better idea to include a bit later. So let's start here in this part with Knight C3. After Knight C3, White is first developing the queen side, keeping our eyes open, and that's why we are going to play here A6. And this is essentially which is a move which defines the Janowski variation, named after the Polish-French player David Janowski. And he was one of the best attackers in the 20th century. But the idea of this move is that we are not yet developing the king side. And with move a6, we are directly threatening to take on c4. Since the white knight is on c3, that is often regarded as the perfect moment to grab the pawn on c4 because white will have some difficulties to win it back. And then we can always strengthen the pawn on c4 with the move b5. So that's why very often this a6 move is a signature move for playing d takes on c4 next. Most of the time, I think that your opponents will continue with c takes on d5. Why is this? Because it is purely psychological reason, I guess, because white wants to punish you for having invested a tempi with a6. So now after c takes on d5, e takes on d5, white says, hey, listen, your pawn on a6, it doesn't do much. Maybe. Yeah, there will be scenarios when the pawn on a6 doesn't do much, but treat it like this. We have forced white to take on d5, meaning we have traded the pawn on e6 for the pawn on c4, and we have a pretty flexible development. Now, white normally plays knight f3 here. We are going to play c6. So first we secure the queen side. You see, we have a very interesting pawn structure there. And then we are willing to develop the king side, probably the dogs with bishop first, followed by the knight. So white here normally has two major continuations, which is either bishop f4 or bishop g5. So let's start maybe with bishop g5. What's the big idea? White wants you to play knight f6, creating a potential pin. But we can simply play bishop e7, take with the knight. This is completely normal. The knight stands here pretty much all right. e3, and here we have gained a tempo for the knight's development on e7. The last good bishop is going to go out most likely on f5. For example, bishop f5 immediately, and now white has a number of choices. For example, white starts with bishop d3, castles, castles, and we play knight d7. After knight e7, of course, watch out for white's b4 move here. After b4, we are going to play knight b6. We are fighting for the c4 weakness. So white normally is trying to play the queen side with ideas like a4, b5. So a4 probably, knight c4, and now if white takes on c4, d takes on c4, we have a rich game. So potentially bishop d3 already might be a problem for white. So knight e5 makes sense because, I mean, e4 doesn't look very good. You just play bishop g4 and white experiences some issues with the pawn on d4. So knight e5, white hits the pawn on c4 and also takes away bishop d3 maneuver from you. So here, queen d6, we counterattack the pawn on b4, which you notice is pretty difficult to defend because there's no rook b1. And after e4, bishop e6, followed by moves like rook d8, we're simply having a nice position. Let's go back a bit here, where white was having a choice. Instead of bishop takes on c4, white can of course also play something else. Play, for example, queen c2. Well, it's okay. I mean, trade it. Here you have a beautiful knight on c4, nothing to complain about. So simply play queen d7. So if white continues with knight e2, trying to get rid of the knight, no problem, takes. And one of the core ideas of these positions is that typically for the clasp structure, the knight for black best stands on d6. So that's why knight c8 here. We want to play knight e6, and once again I for the c4 square, b5. Now we create a passed pawn on the queen side and we can change our mind and position the knight on b6. And now you see that this knight on b6 not only supports the advancement of the a pawn, but also we take care of defending the d5 pawn. So black is once again doing just fine. Yeah, instead of knight e2, maybe white can play rook b1, ignore the knight. But again, your game is pretty straightforward. Trade the queens, knight f5, and even if white carries out this b5 idea, no big deal. Now you see, you cannot really take on b5 because the pawn is under attack on d5. So we're going to play knight e6. And here, although we have slightly worse pawn structure, the knight on c4 is cemented. We can play rook fp8 and maybe at the right moment f6 to shut off white from all of these options to land the knight on e5. Shall we go back for a moment? I believe it was move 11. Here instead of b4, white could play queen c2. I mean, these positions are really similar. So even if you're going to mix up something, I don't think it's going to be so dangerous. So once again, we take, and play the same idea, knight c8. So the idea is to position one knight on d6, the other knight on b6, and we are perfectly ready to meet white's whatever plan he's planning. So if white plays b4, he weakens the c4 square. White might attempt to play e4 because our knights on d7 and c8 are supposedly not really so great. Now we simply take it and go back. We change our mind, and white might be experiencing long-term problems with his isolated pawn on d4. For example, knight c5, knight e6. Again, we're completely fine. Queen c7, rook d8, and then in the long run, white already might be feeling some tensions because the pawn on d4, it's a weakness, while your pawn on b7 is easily defended. Let's step back for a moment to this moment when white played bishop d3. White could also play something like queen b3, hit the pawn on b7, which we can sacrifice because I don't think that white is ready to do this. So knight e7 is a pretty common idea in these Janowski lines. We want to cast a short, and white cannot really take the pawn on b7. There's a very nice trap. You play knight b6, and the threat could be difficult to spot from afar. Bishop c8, not rook b8. Bishop c8, and as you see, the knight on b6 is protected by the queen, and the rook on a8 is defended by the knight. So white plays here, bishop c8, white has to give away a piece, and as you see, we're simply up a piece for not enough material for white. Pretty great. Let's go back even further to this moment of bishop g5, obviously one of the moves. Now instead of this, white could play bishop f4. After bishop f4, our idea is going to be pretty much the same. We play bishop d6. We say, okay, I don't mind to trade the bishops. So most of the time, I think your opponent is going to take on d6. But if he does not, like he plays something like bishop g3, the idea of this move is to keep some tension on the board. Because if you take on g3 at the wrong moment, white might open up this h-file for the rook, and then maybe he could improvise by not castling short. So that's why here we're going to play first knight e7, e3, and play knight f5. So the idea is we want to get the bishop pair. For example, if white takes on d6, we're already ready to recapture on d6 with the knight. Remember, in the cast structure, the pawns on d5, c6, b7, the knight on d6 stands perfectly. Yeah, the bishop, of course, is also nice, but the knight does wonderful things there. So let's say white still ignores and plays bishop d3. Now we take it here. And don't obviously rush with short castle. Because if you castle short, this threat on h7 definitely is there, or white might be still willing to castle the long way. So that's why here you can focus your development first. Knight e7 looks pretty logical. Put the knight on f6, just in case, protect the pawn on h7. Long castle, and a very, very common move here for these positions, play g6. So we're blocking this long diagonal by the queen, and we're thinking about the idea, short castle, king g7, and make sure that white cannot start some hostilities at the king side. The bishop probably is going to go g4 to stop knight e5. Now here's several moves at white's disposal. King b1 probably is going to be the main move. But let's have a look at some of the other moves. For example, e4. And e4 is something, I think, especially in these Janowski lines, that you never want to miss. Why is this? Because your king is still in the center. You have invested for the move a6. So at any given moment, make sure you're not missing this breakthrough. Here in particular, it's not dangerous because we just take it, just play bishop g4, develop pieces casually, pinning the knight on f3, rook e1, let's say white gets rid of the pin, and just castle. So your king feels a bit perhaps vulnerable, but what exactly is white planning to checkmate? Queen d2, queen h6 is a very obvious threat. Well, you just play queen f6. The threat is, the idea is to meet queen h6, pardon my arrows, with queen g7, you trade off the queens, and the white once again is left with this weak pawn on d4, while you have the bishop pair. Let's go back. Now instead of this e4, white might be willing to play knight e5. And knight e5 very often comes with a continuation of a 4. So white wants to cement this knight on e5, but here it's a mistake. Because we can take it, and after knight g4, white can't play f4 for obvious reasons, which is, you grab the pawn on e3, and more importantly, that's a fork. So probably white could play a bit more aggressive, like e4, trying to open up the position. We can close the position with d4, and knight a4, and here I think you need to be very energetic. You play b6. Otherwise, you have a multiple Dachswell weaknesses. So we want to play c5 next and shut out the white knight from a4 from the game. And if white takes on c6, well, bishop d7 is going to be a big problem. The knight on a4 is ganging, rook c8 is a problem, so probably white cannot do this. Let's go back to the move number 7. Right here. Now instead of this, white probably, like I already said, most of the time is going to take on d6. We take on d6 with the queen. White probably is going to play e3. Let's have a look at this e4 breakthrough once again. White is attempting to open up the position because he has slightly better position pieces. Now we have to take. If you don't take, white proceeds with e5, and he has a pawn majority at the king side. So we take it here and pin the knight. Really simple. So white has to continue with queen e2 because, I mean, bishop d3 would be really bad. Yeah, you just play f5 and you're winning a piece. Of course, just don't take on e4 the bishop. There's going to be rook e1, knight f6, short castle, or even king f8 in some occasions. You're doing completely fine. So white gonna do this, and instead probably he plays queen e2, and now knight e7. Knight e7 is necessary so that you can play knight f6, because if you would play knight f6 immediately, there's a couple of problems. Problem number one, your bishop is under attack. Problem number two, white could even take on f6 and ruin your pawn structure. So that's why with knight e7 you protect the bishop on c8. You're improving the idea of playing knight g to f6. So if white proceeds with this idea, you just play king f8. Even if you have lost the possibility to castle, sure, remember the main reason why people castle is to bring the king to the safety. So I don't see any danger for your king here. Knight f5 check, king goes forward. Knight b6, now the knight on f5 has to go. Knight e6, king e7, and white just can't keep this knight, right? So probably something like knight c8, rook c8, followed by g6, put the king on g7, knight f6, and again, think about the long run. White has problems with a pawn on d4, and the bishop on d3 doesn't really do much. So that's why this is, again, not entirely dangerous. We're going to go back here for a moment. Well, maybe white can try to play a long castle instead. But it's the same, you play knight f6. Knight e6, king f8, same idea once again. So white here has a couple of choices. For example, white decides to take on e7. Knight f5, king f8, g6, king g7, knight b6. You already know these ideas. White can't do anything. But there's a trick. There's a trick. White might want to play knight e5, which is a pretty interesting idea, right? So white sacrifices the knight on d6, but he goes after the fork. Well, we can sacrifice it. Why is this? Because this knight on h8 will be trapped. Now, since it wants to be rescued with the bishop on c4 and knight f7, we take care of this square by knight b6, so that white cannot play bishop c4, bishop d3, king f8, and we're simply collecting the knight. So I think that black is simply having the better position. Probably engine says it's about equal, two minor pieces for the rook and two pawns, but the weakness on d4 is still there, and I'm a big fan of minor pieces myself, so I would definitely choose black. Let's go back once again to this moment. Now, instead of this, yeah, I think it was here. Yeah, instead of queen e7, white could still choose to play knight c4. We take on e2, bishop e2, and knight e5. We occupy the d5 square. The idea is to continue with knight f6, knight d7 to f6, g6, king g7, make an artificial castle. And again, we have no issues with development, and white has this long-term problem standing on d4. Let's go back all the way. So this we had a look at, and yeah, that's pretty much it about e4. So e4, again, like I already said, this is something you never want to miss. White will have to play very aggressively, but your game is very straightforward as long as you're not missing some shots. But again, most of the time I think white is going to play e3, the typical castled approach. So white's idea in these positions is develop the king side pieces and think about the idea to play b4, a4, b5 in the future. Why is this? Because white wants to create a potential weakness on c6, something that he can press. Now we are going to play knight e7. We are anticipating white's bishop d3. Yeah, bishop g4 feels probably slightly more ambitious. There's probably nothing terribly wrong. Yeah, here I think there was something wrong with bishop f5. But normally there's nothing wrong with this, but specifically here this is a problem. Because the point is queen b3. Unfortunately, we have problems to defend the b7 square. And if we take the bishop, queen b7, and we try to trap the queen, unfortunately it's not so easy, because white plays knight e5, hits the bishop on d3, and okay, I mean, we managed to trap the queen. But now that we look at the position for how much, 2 rooks and a pawn for a queen, I think it's not a good price. So yeah, let's not mix up this position. Bishop f5, queen b3 could be a problem. So that's why we are going to play bishop g4, instead pinning the knight. And here white has a number of continuations. Probably the most obvious move is h3. I mean, we created a pin and white immediately tries to get rid of it. But let's say white plays queen b3, hits the pawn on b7. Now, here's the idea you already know from a different line early in this chapter. You just play knight e7. Knight e7, we not only sacrifice the pawn on b7, but we also deal with white's idea to play knight e5, which would be coming with a tempi because it would hit the bishop on g4. So white could accept it. Probably he has to accept. We just castle short. The threat is rook fb8. The queen is under attack. White retreats. Yeah, knight e5 is now a mistake because of the rook b8 idea. Yeah, you see white is losing the queen. There's no queen d7. The bishop on g4 is still standing there. The pawn on c6 is protected by the knight. So how white gonna do this? It's gotta be an escape. We play bishop f3 first, here, and the key idea, c5. That's it. So basically we can already stop here because we have sacrificed the pawn for a long-term compensation. Look at the white king. It has difficulties to find a safe place. Short castle is, I mean, the king side is ruined. A long castle, we have an open b file. With the queens on the board, this is getting really unpleasant for white. So let's say white plays queen a3, goes away from the b file and pins our queen. No problem, queen f6, comes with a double threat, c takes to d4, queen f3. So white's position already is starting to look really shaky. So let's go back to this 10th move where white still had a choice. Queen b3 doesn't really achieve white anything, so maybe something like queen c2 to get rid of the pin. But now we deal with the knight e5 threat by eliminating the knight and simply play knight e7. And the best part is we haven't yet castled short. We can castle long because it feels much safer. The idea is to play king b8, put the other knight on c8, on b6, queen f6, g6. We have a rock solid position. If white plays e4, he is weakening a lot of squares in the position, most notably the f4 square. So it's not very obvious how white should continue. Now let's have a look at h3. So white tries to get rid of the pin. h3, we keep it alive, bishop h5, and once again white might be tempted to try queen b3. But you already know what's the idea. You play knight e7, you're willing to sacrifice the pawn on b7, you deal with knight e5, queen b7, short castle, again the same idea. Queen b3, take on f3, c5. So the fact that white has included h3, an extra tempi compared to a previously very similar position, it doesn't change anything. Pawn on h2, pawn on h3, no difference. And if white plays here a short castle, now probably the most ambitious choice here is to play f5, because we are removing the e4 push from the equation. Of course, be very careful when playing such a move, because you want to make sure that white is unable to cement his knight on e5. So if white does this and plays bishop e2 with clear intentions that he wants to play knight e5, now we kill the knight. Take it, knight e7, and we have a lot of ideas. So think about casting short, think about knight f6, knight e4, starting a potential king-set attack, and a pawn on h3 for a future g5, g4 idea might be what we call in chess a potential hook. That's pretty much it. Let's maybe summarize what we learned from this chapter. As you see, the enigmatic d5 course will feature the Janowski. The idea here is that after knight c3 we play a6 with direct threat to play d takes on c4 and b5. And that's why most of the times your opponents will be taking on d5 to showcase that your move a6 is a waste of time. But he also commits himself to a trade which very often is not so great for white. Now after c takes, knight f3, c6, first we develop the queen side, we secure every single pawn, and we want to continue with bishop d6, and most notably also this kingside knight goes to e7, and then if we can, the bishop from c8 goes to f5, sometimes it goes to g4 with a very simple game. Finally, a note for the Casped structure. This is a Casped structure. We have the pawns here, d5, c6, b7. White normally proceeds with e3. The best piece, the best square for your knight is position it on d6 because it controls many critical squares, and also, I cannot really draw it. It also makes white's advancement of a4, b4, b5 much slower.
Access Chess Enigma's free sample lessons. Enjoy videos, interactive exercises, and a digital board to practice anywhere on any device. Sign up for free and start improving your chess from home today.